So let's talk about Filip Hrgovic and the one problem that he can't solve. Now, Filip Hrgovic is a heavyweight fighter and he's been on the comeback since losing to Daniel Dubois. So let's talk about those fights. So the first fight was the Joe Joyce fight. And there's an important context here. He took this fight on short notice. So it's important to acknowledge that context before we give an assessment. Now, in that fight, he committed to his right hand from the very beginning. This is important. Why it's important? Because when a fighter loses, they may lose the conviction to punch with authority. And he showed in the Joe Joyce fight that he will punch with authority. Also, I saw in that fight that sometimes he would double up the right hand. I don't remember Filip Hrgovic ever doing that. So I'm assuming that's an Abel Sanchez influence. I also saw one particular point where he feinted with the right and then threw the 1-2. So I haven't seen that sequence from Hrgovic either. I've seen him feint with the left, but not with the right. And I saw fighting off the ropes. Now, this might be contextual because he may have been fighting off the ropes because it was strategic, or he may have been fighting off the ropes because he was tired. Now, because he took the fight on late notice, there's a strong possibility that he didn't have the conditioning or he didn't have his most optimum conditioning. However, in this fight, I saw him get a second wind. Why is that important? Against Daniel Dubois, he had a very good start. He hit Daniel Dubois with like 30 right hands. And Daniel Dubois' punch resistance in that fight was absolutely phenomenal. But once we got to the middle rounds, it seemed that Filip Hrgovic lost his steam and he was unable to get a second wind. So in this fight, he was able to get a second wind, which again would indicate perhaps some better conditioning. And I saw bravery and character because he got cut early in the fight. But despite being cut and despite having to deal with that resistance, he was still able to get to the end and actually win the fight. So I think that there was a lot of positives to take from that fight. And then, of course, we had the David Adeleye fight. In this fight, I saw that Filip Hrgovic would sometimes throw the left hook to the temple. This is what Triple G used to do to opponents. So again, I'm assuming this is an Abel Sanchez influence. And he also introduced a body attack. And Filip Hrgovic never used to focus on the body. So again, I believe that this is an influence from Abel Sanchez. And he had a greater punch output. He also had good jab activity, but that's part of his identity. And, I saw some good combinations, jab, straight right, then left hook to the body. So the jab, straight right kind of sets up that left hook to the body. And I saw the right hand to the body, right hand to the head, and the 1-2 smooth and fast through the target. And what I also saw that I thought was really good was that at points, Filip Hrgovic would shorten up his punches. And Lennox Lewis used to do that. And I think it's effective. Obviously sometimes you might, put extra power in the punches, but sometimes you just need to shorten up the punches. And this is really good, especially if you're anticipating some counters. And he did do this. So this is a good tactic. And again, I'm assuming this is the influence from Sanchez. And again, he was able to come back from cuts. And you'll see a bit of a pattern here. In the 8th round, he dropped Adeleye, and then Adeleye came back. And then Adeleye actually looked like he hurt Filip Hrgovic. So this was a tough fight. I would say that Filip Hrgovic won the fight in terms of he won the majority of the rounds, but it was a brutal fight. He had to take some hard punches, particularly in that 8th round. So I think the important aspect of this, what I guess you would call a comeback from Filip Hrgovic, is the Abel Sanchez influence. I've always said this, trainers are responsible for harnessing boxing environments. And here's a question, are trainers important? I think trainers are extremely important. And I think Abel Sanchez, we can see the Abel Sanchez blueprint on Filip Hrgovic's style. Remember, a trainer, they teach various things, whether it's jabs, counters, strategy, adjustments, etc. But they also create environments, and that's so important. Each boxing environment is different. Abel Sanchez, for example, has fighters do neck exercises. Perhaps this is why a majority of his fighters have improved punch resistance. And I think the Abel Sanchez-Filip Hrgovic partnership, it's an important one. But here's the problem that might be hard to solve. In his last 3 fights against Dubois, Joe Joyce and David Adeleye, Filip Hrgovic has been cut. Abel Sanchez actually spoke about how do you deal with a fighter that gets cut a lot? What adjustments do you make? And he stated that in training, you might have to wear bigger head guards. And also additional to this, Abel Sanchez is a great cut man. great trainer and great cutman. And this is essential because he's practically been working overtime, because both occasions he's worked with Filip Hrgovic, he's had to deal with cuts. But one of the issues I think with Hrgovic is that when he gets caught, he takes the punches clean. He doesn't ride the shots. And any fighter that fights by putting their head on their opponent's chest is always going to give him problems, because any type of headbutts, you will assume that Filip Hrgovic, unfortunately, will come up worse. So here is some concluding points. From my perspective, Abel Sanchez is trying to make Hrgovic an offensive-minded fighter. Now, in fairness, Hrgovic's identity was of an offensive-minded fighter, but there's problems with this style because Filip Hrgovic, as we've discussed, is prone to cuts. So the more offensive he is, the more opportunities are presented to potentially for him to get cut. So it seems that there needs to be some form of adjustments. Yes, you can't probably make Hrgovic an effective defensive fighter, but you need to balance the offense with effective defense. And this could be simple things like a higher guard, better foot positioning. There are little nuances that can reduce the risk of Filip Hrgovic getting cut. Also, he needs to learn how to deal with opponents that will put their head on his chest. And to learn this style, you could learn it in camp, through sparring, and of course in the ring. So the premise here is that Hrgovic is primarily an offensive fighter, and he needs to maintain that identity, but he also needs to be more defensively responsible. So how do you reduce getting cuts? Well, in camp, you can use certain tactics like bigger gloves, and as Abel Sanchez stated, bigger headgear. Also, there's some other things you could do. For example, you could consider consulting a sports dermatologist, as they might be able to give you some techniques on scar tissue management. And this might be a really good investment. So this is a significant problem for Filip Hrgovic. In fairness, he does have a great cutman, because Abel Sanchez knows how to manage cuts, and he's shown that in Filip Hrgovic's last 2 fights. But there might need to be some more precautions taken to be able to deal with this cut issue. So we're talking about precautions taken in sparring. We're talking about maybe increasing the team with a dermatologist, a sports dermatologist. So there may need to be further adjustments made, because worst case scenario, Filip Hrgovic could be winning a fight, gets a nasty cut, and then loses the fight on the cut as opposed to being beaten by the better fighter. Of course, you can't 100% reduce the risk of getting cut, but you could significantly lower the risk if you take the appropriate steps. So is this a problem he can't solve? Well, it's a problem where he can manage the risk more effectively. But as we've seen in the last 3 fights, the cuts for Filip Hrgovic has become a very serious issue.